day out there, and welcome back to Is Your Way in Your Way. And for my new listeners, my name is Cassandra Crawley Mayo, and I am your host to Is Your Way in Your Way. This show, we will uncover the barriers that keep us from living our best life. Today's guest is Kristan Swan, is what she calls an experiential learner, meaning she's learned some of life's greatest lessons the hard way through mistakes, missteps, and moments of grace. Her story is one of gratitude, resilience, and the power of second chances. Kristan reminds us that it's okay to be a work in progress, that faith, honesty, and humility can transform even our hardest seasons into the most defining ones. So, if you ever felt like you're learning life's lessons the long way, this episode is for you. So stay tuned, guys. You don't want to miss this conversation. And we do talk about topics related to self-improvement, also enable you to have some self-reflection. And today our topic is, are you limiting yourself? And I'm going to introduce Kristan Swan to the stage. Hi, Kristan.
Hello, Cassandra. Thank you so much for having me today. This is just a delight.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And I love this topic. Are you limiting yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. And so listeners, I want to share a couple of things, some other things about Kristan, so you can kind of understand perhaps why she's like she is and why is she answering some of the questions like she does. For example, she's raised in a constantly changing environment. She finds stability in stories and books and the wisdom of her grandparents. She's learned so much from her grandparents. So, Kristan, I would like to know that actually you are a coach, okay? And your mission is simple yet profound. And your mission is to help you see that your story is still being written and to give you the courage, the clarity, and creativity to write it on purpose. So, my first question to you, you being a coach to entrepreneurs, and then you pivoted and you decided that you want to more help people build lives that feel deeply aligned with who they are. So from an entrepreneur coach to an individual that supports and empowers people to be aligned to who they're supposed to be, what made you pivot to that from an entrepreneur? And it sounds like to me, is that the only job you had, was just being an entrepreneur? You're a serial entrepreneur? Or what's up with that?
Oh, gosh. Yes. Well, I thank you. There are a lot of questions in there. So I will start by saying I have had a multitude of jobs, right? And
Okay.
I've always been kind of a self-starter. I started at a very young age, I guess being entrepreneurial, because I would go around my neighborhood, and when I knew a neighbor was going to go on vacation, I'd knock on their door. Hey, do you want someone to help you, water the plants, bring in your paper, whatever it was, right?
Okay.
So I had a lot of different jobs. I worked through college and immediately thereafter. And we were talking about the business coaching and working with other business owners. And that became something that I did for about a decade or more. And that was a lot. I enjoyed that work so much because what I realize is I really like to help people, and I really like to help people kind of achieve the success that is meaningful to them.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great.
And so working directly with owners and founders of businesses, so primarily independent business owners, gave me a chance to be really have an impact, right? And make a difference for folks. And the pivot I made following that was after the pandemic, I was pretty exhausted because I am happy to say all of my clients during the pandemic did very well. Nobody went underwater. In fact, some people had their best years ever.
Excellent.
And I was burned out. I didn't realize it. It kind of took me a year afterwards to realize that I was just thoroughly exhausted.
Okay.
And I've always kind of had this thing where, so I went to college, I got a bachelor's, and education is really important in my family. You mentioned my grandparents, and so both it's funny because I got this message about how important education was from my one grandmother who was very bright, and her circumstances, she essentially graduated from high school and then started working. So my other grandparents both attended undergraduate, and then my grandfather went on to get graduate degrees. So it was like they both were telling me the same thing, which is education is the way,
right?
But from very different perspectives, right? So I went back to school and got a master's that I completed in 2023, and I got a master's of education. So, and the focus was on part of it was on leadership, and so I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I could teach, right? And I realized that probably going into academia was not going to be a good fit for somebody who was a long time entrepreneur and kind of used to doing things their own way. But I realized, that deeper calling that you referred to of kind of that has been such a through line in all the twisty turns that my life has taken, of wanting to support people and help people, and also give people a way to be their most full versions of themselves.
Now, Kristan, I want to stop you for a minute.
Yeah.
Now, my listeners are what I indicated before. Many of them are stuck, and they're stuck because of these. They have all these barriers, these limiting beliefs. So with that, it's hard for them to move forward. And listening to you, it didn't sound like you had a lot of barriers, or if you did, you knocked them down. Because like you said, you were an entrepreneur, and then like, okay, well, that may not be working for me. So let me go back to school. Let me focus on education. And for you, like I indicated earlier, how your environment constantly changed.
Right.
And I'm just curious though, when you think of something, it's kind of like, okay, I know that this isn't working for me, so therefore I want to do something different. It didn't appear that it took you a long time, So I'm wondering, when I think about my listeners, like, okay, this isn't working for me, I want to do this. Okay, I think I'm going to do this. What was it about you, or what could my listeners do to make that change, to overcome the barriers that they are experiencing?
Well, thank you for stopping me, because a couple of things I want to say about that is it's very easy in the retelling of this to make it sound like there was just this kind of effortless gliding, right, from one thing to the next. I'd think it and then I'd do it. And in some ways there was a little bit of that. And I will say, so okay, so let me back up for a second. There were definitely moments where I was terrified to make a
Okay.
change. I was
Okay.
terrified.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in one way, things would either there would be a glimmer, just a glimmer of opportunity that might present itself. And that might be in, reaching out to someone and asking for help about how they
Mm-hmm.
did something. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of could give me that path forward,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
There could be, and there have been so many of those moments of grace, right?
Okay.
But you have to look up for those, the opportunities are there,
Mm-hmm.
because people, I do believe in general, want to also help you, right? I mean, there is a lot of kindness that is available to us if we can just, take a breath and kind of lift our head up for a moment, especially when we're in those really dark
Mm-hmm.
times. So
Mm-hmm.
there have been just the littlest steps forward that I could
Okay.
take.
Okay.
And what happens is when you take that first little step, and it could be as little as, like I said, reaching out to a friend and saying, I'm thinking of making a change,
Okay.
and I'm, whether it was actually kind of scary for me. And this is
Sure.
going to sound odd, to move from landscape design, this business that I had built,
Yeah.
into coaching, because
Right.
I was essentially, my thought was that I was going to move into business coaching my colleagues, and my colleagues were looking at me thinking like, well, who are you to give us advice? Like, what's so great about the business that you've built that you are the one who's going to tell us how to do things so much better? And
Mm-hmm.
the truth of it was,
Mm-hmm.
it was the fact that I had made so many mistakes in my own business and
Mm-hmm.
learned from them, that is what I could share. It
Okay.
wasn't it. So sometimes what you
Okay.
have to share is the messiness that you have experienced too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
I think that there was that piece of just recognize just these little tiny steps. And then the other thing I will say, and you were mentioning, just how kind of constantly changing and really chaotic my upbringing felt to me, is that even though in this retelling of the story, and there is, there is a through line of me just charging ahead, my charging ahead was, a lot of it was really based on the fear of being stuck. Like the
yeah, but check
fear
this
of,
out though, Kristen.
yeah,
Something else about you that you indicated, you talked about experiential learning. I mean, that to me, in other words, you learn from your mistakes, and it appeared because your environment wasn't constant, and you were here, you were there, and during your learning, you took it as, okay, I made a mistake, okay, I got fear. So
oh,
what
but
what
I have to jump in 1 second, because
yeah,
there is the transition from saying that is a lesson learned,
yeah,
failing, and going into that space of saying, okay, this is now wisdom that I have, right? This is a
right,
lesson learned.
yeah,
There is this very uncomfortable space in between that, where on the
sure,
heels of failing,
yes,
oh my gosh, did I just want to crawl under the covers and just never show my head and my face again? I mean, the I always like to be transparent. I'm married now 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Okay.
very happy. I have found the right person for myself.
Okay. Okay.
I had 2 divorces, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
and so coming to the space of initiating my second divorce, boy, that was scary. And also there was just, I felt like, gosh, one divorce, okay, people are thinking, okay, everyone can make a mistake. 2 divorces, come on. Then I felt like I felt so bad about myself.
Okay.
And I also, I, I, I had to, I mean, the thing that was also really kind of motivating my staying in the relationship was that shame. And
Mm-hmm.
at a certain
Mm-hmm.
point, I had to just decide to choose myself as
Okay.
opposed to what other people thought about me or my choices.
So that sounds like that was one lesson, that divorce that completely changed how you see yourself.
It
That
did,
because
but
yeah.
it took a while for me
Yeah.
to forgive myself. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I spent, I think that there there still was that time in between of really graduating to where it felt like I got meaningful information that allowed for me to grow.
Okay.
There was that in between phase
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want to be really honest with your listeners about, and I want to share that, and I want to allow us to kind of wallow in that even
Mm-hmm.
for a little bit, because that's very real. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't ever want to make it sound easy.
Okay.
It's simple. These are
Sure.
often simple choices that we have
Oh.
in front of us, but they're
Uh-huh.
not easy.
Yeah.
And so part of what for me I have noticed is there is the incident, the moment of failure that also ultimately becomes the moment of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And there is that those however long it takes, days, weeks, months,
Right.
years, where all of those feelings, and a lot of them are shame, humiliation,
Mm-hmm.
and those are powerful,
Absolutely.
are still very, it's easy to become activated. It's easy to kind of find yourself
Mm-hmm.
feeling those same, you can think back to, oh gosh, this is what happened, and you can feel it in your body, how you felt in that moment. And there takes time for it to kind of alchemize, right?
Right. But what you did,
Into
yeah,
in
but you learned from it, Kristen, and you've
Thank you.
moved on. And that's kind of what I want to highlight for my listeners. Sure, it wasn't easy emotionally, I can imagine, but yet you picked yourself up. I'm not saying you did it in a day,
No,
but you're like,
no.
okay, I want to do, okay, now I need to move forward and I need to do this.
Yeah.
And what you went through, absolutely, that can get a person stuck. So
Yes.
I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about more about what got you unstuck for you to move on and do something different.
Well, I think one thing is a big mindset shift for me actually happened when I was still married to my second husband.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I mean, it was not a very happy union during our years together.
Mm-hmm.
I was working a lot because that was a way that I could kind of
Right.
an area of focus that brought me joy and kept me busy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working with my business owners, and so
Okay.
many times my business owners would come to me and they would say, I've got this issue and I'm so concerned about it. And so one of the things that we would do, which is a very natural thing to do, I think we've all done this, it's like, okay, let's talk about what's the worst case scenario, right? So you do this whole thing where you're like, what's the worst thing that can happen if this thing just unravels, right? And you go down that path. And the thing is that we are very good at going down the path of imagining these worst case scenarios, right? Because we actually, we've usually experienced them, or we've known someone who's experienced them. So it's very easy to kind of just go down that path. And what you find at the end of the path of the worst case scenario is you're essentially asking the question, is this going to kill me or not? I mean, in the most basic of terms. And generally you get to the end there and you realize, okay, it bumps, bruises, yes, but it's not going to kill me. So I would do that, but then I started, I'd work with these clients over time, and I'd really get to know them, and I'd get to know their businesses, and so I'd have a real kind of history, right, of who they were and what had been going on in their business. And I started thinking, I thought, well, what if we think about what if we can do the whole worst case scenario thing if you're bound and determined to do that, and humor me. What if we do the best case scenario? What if we do the best case scenario? And what's interesting about the best case scenario is we actually don't know what it is, right? There's so many different possibilities that could be the best case scenario. However, what I will say, and this is something that all of us can do when we are faced in these moments where we're feeling like, oh, I got this thing, and you're ready to do that worst case scenario, lean into what the best case scenario could be. And you probably only have just a tiny idea of what that can be. However, you can think back in your life and think back to those moments when you felt like the worst case scenario was knocking at your door, and what actually happened, right? Probably something unexpected happened, something that you didn't actually anticipate happening. And that's what I'm saying, is that most of us are going to have enough data points in our own life to say, gosh, I know that the worst case scenario didn't happen. And actually what happened ended up being, in a way, a version of a best case scenario.
Right. Because you know what? Another thing I would say you talk about a lot. We talk about the worst case scenario, but you also talk about second chances. This could happen. This wasn't so good, but yet. So I'd like to know, tell us a time when a second chance showed up and how you avoided letting the fear you talked about or regret get in the way of receiving it.
Well, I think that I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, gosh, if you had told me that I was going to get married again after,
I was going to bring that up. I mean,
after 2 divorces, and I would have said, I mean, you can ask anyone in my family after my second divorce. You can ask any of my girlfriends, what was Kristan saying? She was saying, never, ever, 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 ever again. Not that I wouldn't be in a relationship, but just never getting married again. Never.
That's right. And you didn't let that fear get in the way. You didn't regret. You received it.
I did, and it really, I did, but it took a little while, and it was interesting because I definitely had to go through a bit of a journey to get there. And part of the journey was I had to forgive myself for really what what had kind of precipitated my earlier choices in partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the forgiving of myself, I also had to allow for that best case scenario, right? I mean, I actually did have a belief that I could be a good partner in a marriage or a committed relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that was finally taking some time to get to know myself, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time, I was very good at observing others. I mean, that for me was a survival strategy as a child, and ultimately became something that was a skill that I had that I could employ as an adult. And it's not a bad thing, right? To be in tune with others, right? But when that is kind of all you're about, observing others and trying to meet their needs and not knowing who you are, then that becomes troublesome.
But listen, I'm curious. Is that how you discovered your spiritual autobiography? Let's talk a little bit about discovering your spiritual autobiography.
Yeah, I do think that for me, the path of when I think about discovering your spiritual autobiography, and this is, I consider my spiritual autobiography, I mean, I've written so many at this point, right? I mean, it's always growing and evolving and changing. So I call it a living document. It's not something that's fixed. And to get back to your question, I did need to have a sense of who I was, right? I needed to get curious about who is Kristan. What are the things that are meaningful to you? What are the things that what am I all about, right? Not in comparison to someone else, not so that I can fit in to a certain group or relationship. Who am I? And so I had to get curious, and I did it through journaling. I did it through just, kind of quiet reflection. I did it, also through continuing to make mistakes and putting myself out there, sometimes in situations that were uncomfortable.
Exactly.
But I had to know myself. And then only then, when I had a sense of who I was and I had some trust around that, which, so I think you get to, you build, right? You've got some curiosity about who you are, and you start figuring that out. And then you start layering on that you can trust yourself, right? That you are someone that you can make choices by listening to yourself. And from there, then I was able to think about kind of my relationship to that which is bigger in the world, or or even universe, right? So that's kind of where I'm leading towards that spiritual autobiography, right? That's entering into that conversation. And again, that next level of curiosity and inquiry around now who I know who I am. And I have a little bit of an idea of what I am here for, or what I want to be doing here in this existence. What is my relationship to that which is bigger than me?
That's great, because I want to go back to my listeners. Now, you did it. So could you explain what that spiritual autobiography is, so that they can transition and get to know who they are, start healing, and get to what I would call their purpose of a different direction? So what is a spiritual autobiography?
Well, a spiritual autobiography, and I don't mean to be cagey about this, but it really, it looks different for every single person who participates. And, I remember the very first time that I did a spiritual autobiography, it was when I was facilitating a small group, and it was within a church community. So there was a kind of a religious aspect to it. And as a result, that spiritual autobiography really was kind of this reflection on the watching, especially my grandparents, right? We were talking about that they're such a important source of information for me. And I spent so much time with them. So watching my one grandparents who weren't particularly religious, and yet they ultimately ended up founding a Unitarian church in their community. And that provided a great source of community for them. Whereas, my other grandmother had this very contentious relationship with her upbringing, which was within a very strict Catholic faith. And so kind of observing those. So for me, at the beginning of my journey and the very first time I did a spiritual autobiography, I had to unpack, so to speak, or just examine. I mean, it didn't, you'd unpack sounds so serious or sort of psychological. I had to examine kind of this spiritual and the religious and think about where they kind of were the same and where they ventured into different directions. And
so how would you, okay, so my listeners are listening to you. How would they start that? Like, what do you do? What are the steps, even though there are differences, but how do you get started with that? What is that?
Well, a couple of things. I'll back up and say, if your listeners are at the point where they are saying, I'm not even sure who I am right now. Right. Okay. I've kind of lost touch with myself, or, like me, you didn't grow up in a situation where getting to know yourself was encouraged. Right. I would say I have a journal. It's called Spaghetti on the Wall. And it is really meant to develop a habit of discernment. And what that means is that you journal every day, and it gives you prompts, and it allows you to kind of put down what has transpired in the course of a day. And then it asks you questions like, what were those moments that were a double thumbs up, right? In the journal, it's called a big yes. Like, what were those big yeses of your day? So you talk about, talk about having maybe, and big yeses don't have to be big moments. A big yes of your day, for instance, could be like my big yes a week ago was I was on an airplane and I got to sit next to this 8-year-old young man, and he ended up engaging me in a conversation, and we were talking about this game he was playing. And how nice was that? I mean, I hadn't talked to an 8-year-old in quite a while, and it was just really sweet. Like that was a really great moment for me that day.
So that spaghetti journal has prompts.
Yes.
Okay, which is good. And you called it spaghetti because it can be all over the place?
Well, I don't know about you, but so my mom was not if she's listening out there, I'm asking her forgiveness right now. My mom was not a great cook growing up. And so the journal is called Spaghetti on the Wall because we had this one friend who liked to come over and cook for us, and they were very flamboyant in the kitchen. And whenever they made spaghetti, because spaghetti and meatballs was one of my grandmother's favorite meals, they would throw spaghetti on the ceiling, and they always told us that's how you tell if it's done or not. Right? If it sticks, it's done.
And they literally did that.
And they literally did that. And so I had to name this journal after that, because it's just that image of kind of throwing up some noodles, and, sometimes they're going to stick and sometimes they're not. And you just, if they're not sticking yet, then you kind of keep going, right? You cook a little bit longer and you pick another one and you throw it up there. And if it sticks, maybe it's worth paying attention to, right?
Wow, that's a good story. Okay,
So
I'm gonna tell my story.
yeah. So this is
Wow.
a journal that you are meant to just spend about 15 minutes a day. It has
Okay.
the prompts, it walks you through. So you kind of, it allows you to get to know yourself. So for those listeners who feel like, I know who I am, I feel like I can trust myself. I've got a clear idea of what's important to me, right? And then if you're interested in discovering your spiritual autobiography, you kind of want to explore that idea of kind of what is your relationship to that which is bigger than yourself. Kind of a place to start can be thinking about, I mean, I mentioned that my very first one, particularly because it was done in a church setting, the conversation of religion came in. I do start the workshops, the Discovering Your Spiritual Autobiography workshops, asking participants, because I think we've all been exposed to religion at some level, right? That let's think about your history. What's your family's relationship with religion? What's your relationship with religion? And I think I use the words like, what have you inherited? Like, what are inherited beliefs, right?
Like self-discovery.
And then what are those beliefs that you've acquired along the way? And so it's kind of the workshop is really goes through several. I don't put you down and say, okay, we're doing a spiritual autobiography right now. We actually have several steps of self-discovery. And so we're looking at kind of those beliefs and where they came from, and the ones that we're still attached to and the ones that we're no longer attached to. And then we look at different times in our life. And then from there, some people have done a spiritual autobiography that's about one moment in time. Like, I had one participant who wrote about a weekend trip with their family that was just kind of in the way that the world revealed itself to them in that moment. I've had other people who've been much more kind of chronological about this is where they started and here's where they are now in terms of their understanding. I've had other people where their understanding of kind of what is spiritual or spirituality is directly related to nature. So their reflection can be much more of a connection to nature, right?
Like you said, everybody's different.
Everyone is different,
right?
And that's and so I really guide you at the beginning, and then when we get to the actual assignment of your spiritual autobiography, that's where I'm a little more hands off, and at that point I invite people to, I don't know, just see where you're, there's no right or wrong answer. And this could be your spiritual autobiography for this moment.
Exactly.
But it doesn't mean that it's your spiritual autobiography for tomorrow or even an hour from now. And so getting back to anyone who is feeling stuck or limited, your very next moment can be different, right?
Yeah. And that is actually a great segue to my next question, because see, many of my listeners are trying to get out of their way, right? Their own way. They're often stuck between who they were and who they're becoming. So what would you say to someone afraid to start over? What would you say to my listeners?
Oh gosh, that I'll say what I have said to myself in those moments, that there was a long time I talked about being a great observer
Mhm.
of people. And kind of a byproduct of that is I think I waited for permission oftentimes, right? I was waiting for like the perfect time to do stuff. So there was a lot of waiting. I'm going to tell you, and I have to tell myself this too. You give yourself permission. Do not wait for someone else to give you permission over your own life. And self-discovery is not being selfish. Okay. So be clear that this is not you being selfish, right? So you get to give yourself permission. And I mean, the other thing that I tell myself every day is as long as I'm still standing and breathing, my story is not over. Right. My story is not over. And I get to be the author of my own story, and I get to be the star of my own story. Right. I get to be the protagonist.
Right. And because of that, it's kind of like our title. Are you limiting yourself?
Yeah.
So that's kind of why you're talking about the autobiography, and it's okay to start over. You do get second chances, and and as you indicated, you transition, you move from this to that, which is okay, and it took time, but yet you didn't limit yourself in doing it. You were up for the challenge, even though there was fear that set in.
Yeah. So just, I mean, it's really, and I like what you said, that not only give yourself permission, but also give yourself time. I think that there was a sense in a season of my life where I felt like there was this need to rush, or that there was some sort of, I don't know, somebody was keeping track of time somewhere, and you get to, allow for the time that it takes. Don't stop judging whether you're doing it fast enough or well enough, right?
Like timetable, right? Like, I got to get married at this age. I could have children at this age. You're correct. You need to take your time. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Hey, Kristan, how can my listeners find you? I bet there's some that want that spaghetti journal. Tell us how we can find you.
Probably the easiest way is on my website, kristanswan.com. And for people who are on social media, you can look up Kristan Swan on the various platforms. But yeah, check out my website. The journal is there, and I really recommend it. I use it. I use it every day. I like to start my day with the journal. I have other folks who love to end their day. They feel like it just kind of calms their mind, so they can go to sleep really easily. Yeah. I like it because I feel like it kind of sets the tone for my day. Again, because I have that tendency to rush, right? For me, starting the day with the journal is just a great way to kind of breathe and ease into the day.
Right. And I love that you're having prompts, because people just get an empty book and write. And there's sometimes they're like, well, what do I say? Well, if you're not a journaler, so this gives you some direction. And so that's what I really, really like about this. And Kristan, you and I could talk and talk and talk. We just can't. I just want to thank you for your insight. I am inspired by your journey. The listeners don't know the full journey, how you stayed in one area for a summer, and, just life stuff, period. But
there is life stuff.
Yeah. But you've gotten second chances time and time again, and you have embraced them, know? So I just want to thank you. And I want to tell my listeners now that, please share this podcast with your friends, someone that you have their best interest at heart, that you believe they are limiting themselves, and have them listen to Kristan about what it is that she's done and have accomplished. And I just think, it'll be an eye opener for many people, because I always say, whatever you're going through, you're not alone.
Absolutely. You
You
are
are
not
not by
alone.
yourself. Yeah,
You are not
yeah.
by yourself.
Exactly. So, Kristen, thank you so much. Like I tell my listeners, bye for now, and God bless you all and love you, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.